through her Black August Archives project, an archive dedicated to the documenting, collecting, and preserving histories of freedom fighters in the prison system. She hopes to help spread histories of resistance to inspire and impact future trajectories of liberation. So welcome, Tiana. Thank you. And so Kayla Smith is committed to serving as a global change agent through community building rooted in storytelling and cultural arts exchanges. Born and raised in Stone Mountain, Georgia, Kayla has graduated. Very proud of her. She graduated concentrating in international studies with a concentration in diplomacy at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. She has studied abroad in Antigua and Barbuda, for 6 months, and in Santa del Cuba, Cuba, in which she discovered her passion for gaining proximity to truth through an arts lens rooted in research, writing, and civic engagement. Kayla has continued to put the arts in conversation with diplomacy through her academic endeavors, campus involvement, and community service. At Spelman, Kayla was an active member of the Ethel Waddell Githy Honors Program, tutored in the Spelman Writing Center, and served as a social justice fellow. She is the founder and director of Spelman College's first podcast, The Blue Record. As her social justice initiative, The Blue Record podcast is a product of Kayla and her team's commitment to justice work, storytelling, and critiquing counterproductive discourses that interrupt the mobility of Black women. She is also a proud member of Phi Beta Kappa and the Phi Beta Delta Honor Society of International Scholars. So Kayla has interned. Again, she's just graduated this past May, interned in the office of Congressman Joaquin Castro for the summer, and has recently begun her graduate studies at the Johns Hopkins International School of Advanced International Studies with her MA in International Relations. So again, welcome, Kayla. I had the pleasure of serving as the advisor to the Blue Record podcast, which we will explore. And I learned so much. I say advisor, Kayla really mentored me. So, just her drive to turn an organization, that was a mentoring for me. So again, welcome to you both, and Tiana facilitated a wonderful discussion with myself and Lael and other colleagues and archivists and community members and activists about community organizing, activist organizing. So really elated to have both of you here for this conversation today. So just to get started today, would you all both mind giving a little bit of background about not only your projects and the work that you're doing, but how did you enter the conversation around archives and memory work? And we can start with Tiana.
Yes, well, first off, I just want to say thank you all for having me. I'm really, really honored and excited to be here. I was ecstatic when I was asked to join this conversation, and it's just been a pleasure hearing everyone speak so far this morning here. I know it's afternoon for y'all now. I'm a few hours ahead. But yeah, I guess for just some background on my research and my work and how I kind of got into this world of archiving, I received my bachelor's from UC Davis in cinema and digital media and African American studies this past year. So I graduated virtually with the pandemic and all that, and started grad school with the pandemic. So it's been an adjustment, definitely. But yeah, while I was there, I was kind of, I guess, dabbling in different organizations that were related to prison organizing, just because I knew I have family members who were incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. So it was just always a passion of mine. So for instance, Books to Prisoners, which is an organization at UC Davis that focuses on getting, reading material to prisoners because of the different censorship issues that are in place. And so collecting books and whatnot. And then I had the opportunity to go inside to Solano State Prison and work on a podcast with incarcerated men there and kind of assist them with audio journalism, and then started a podcast at UC Davis called Abolition Radio. So I was doing all these different things, and then started a research project that was looking at the roots of the prison movement from the 1960s and the 70s, And that's when my mentor was like, hey, I have this whole archive. It's a personal archive that I think I should digitize. I need someone to help me. You're interested in this work. Could you help me digitize this archive? Because I think the public should see it. And I was just like, whoa, like this is super cool. Like I've never seen such material, just posters from the 70s, from Attica, and just newspapers from the Black Panthers, and just a variety of materials in person that I was being taught how to digitize, as well as like VHS and things like that. And then the pandemic hit, I graduated, and I was like, okay, I was working on this project. It's very important. I think people should know about the importance of archiving, kind of think about this notion of like the liberatory archive, and I should continue this work. Particularly the protests that were happening last summer kind of inspired me, because I felt very stagnant, felt like I was torn away from my community after graduating. So that's when I got in touch with my mentor again. It was like, I want to start this digital archive, and I think I want to call it Black August Archives. For those who may not be aware, Black August is a tradition. It's a period where folks commemorate those who have been lost in this resistance against the prison system. And I wanted to name it that in honor of those individuals. And since I've now started at USC, I've kind of got in touch with folks out here, such as like Black August Los Angeles, and been organizing with them and kind of getting their guidance on what should be archived, what may be too personal, and kind of protecting folks on the inside. I've made connections with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. So it's been really nice kind of just developing the archive with folks who have that intergenerational knowledge that I may not really have access to yet. So it's definitely in the works, but the archive is really dedicated to kind of documenting and preserving these histories that are very suppressed often by, you know, the prison system, and a lot of folks lose their lives in this fight. So it's yeah, it's been really great though. So that's kind of my work in a nutshell.
Thank you, Tiana. And I want to come back to that discussion of what does it mean working with incarcerated populations, but also the communities and families they work with. That's a really, I wrote that down, so we'll come back to that. And so Kayla, you could elaborate on your work, your current work, and
Sure.
your entree into the archives.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you, Lael, Holly, Keandra. Thank you all for organizing this wonderful week of events and bringing Tiana and I into conversation about our work. I will say that my first introduction into the archive was fall 2017 in Honors English 193 with Dr. Michelle Height, where I explored with my classmates the Atlanta Child Murders Archive. Being an Atlanta native, I wasn't aware of the Atlanta Child Murder Archive until I went to the AUC Woody Library and looked at them. And just thinking about memory and how you preserve a life, really just something in me clicked where I was like, this matters. You know, even when I think back about the archive, there wasn't a lot for those kids left in the archive, like maybe a pamphlet, barely any like report cards or any photos. So it showed you the importance of preserving, you know, space and people, and how do you do that? And so from there, I began incorporating the archives in everything I did. From research at Brown University, where I covered the work of Rights and Reasons Theater, a theater research organization that would go into the community of Rhode Island and, you know, interview different people living in Rhode Island and then make plays about the people they would work with. I did a lot of research on their founder, George Bass, and his connection to the International Arts Coalition with, you know, the Black global arts movement going on at the time. So expanding my eyes to look at the intersections of race, storytelling, and international affairs really helped narrow my focus as a career. And it made me realize that there's so much potency, diplomatic potency in art, especially Black art and Black art production. And that led me to looking into the archives of the jazz ambassadors, Diffie Gillespie, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and the work they did, to pave the way for cultural exchanges, such as Fulbright, which a lot of people don't know that the 1946 Fulbright Act was thanks to the work of those three Black men advocating jazz diplomacy. So I began exploring these intersections until I realized that we don't, we're having all these awesome conversations, right? And I want to incorporate the voices of my collegiate siblings at Spelman. And it made me realize that they've already been in conversation, but in print. So at Spelman from 1940 to 2014, we had the Spelman Connection. And the Spelman Connection is juicy. I love it. I recommend anyone who has the time to go into the archives, please go and look at the Spelman Connection. And I began looking through the Spelman Connection. I realized that a lot of my Spelman siblings who came before me are having the same conversations that my peers and I are having today. So I thought, what would be an awesome way to put the archives in conversation with the people on campus today? And what medium would be the best way to host and hold and preserve those, conversations? And I turned to podcasting. And so the Blue Record came to be, paying homage to Ida B. Wells' phenomenal Red Record. The Blue Record is everything to me and to my peers of who we worked on this for. It's just been an awesome project to work on. And I know some of my podcast teammates are here on the call, and I just want to say thank you guys for keeping it going. So proud of all of you. And this is not the end for me doing archive work. I've actually began carving out my capstone for grad school, and I know that's due in like 2 years, and why am I even thinking about that? But I'm looking at currently archiving the work of Black women ambassadors who came before us. 2 of them are our Spelman sisters, Ambassador Ruth Davis and Ambassador Aurelia Brazil. And after speaking to one ambassador, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, who is now the first Chief Diversity Officer at the State Department, even she shared that, being a Black woman in international affairs, sometimes you couldn't always give the off the record stories. And, I told her that, but we need those off the record stories. So that's what I'm currently looking at for my capstone for grad school, because I really think it's important now more than ever, especially with the diversity push at the State Department, that we do capture the voices of ambassadors who came before us, especially the Black women ambassadors, since there are very few who went on to become career ambassadors. So that's a little bit about what I do and my interest in the intersections of race storytelling and international affairs.
Thank you so much, Kayla and Tiana. That was great. So I'll move to, we have some more questions, but again, Kayla, I want to get back to that question as well, an interrogation of, sharing some of these underdocumented stories and how to do that ethically as well, or your take on that. So we'll move to some of the questions. So Kayla, going back to you, as the founder of this incredible Blue Record podcast, how has the research process and the archive impacted your storytelling in the Blue Record? And you were just really getting into that, but also the Blue Record podcast has a whole archive team and an archivist, which is amazing. And, made my beating heart be still as an archivist. So I'd love to elaborate on some of that as well. And, how did you even construct that? I would say the team, but also how's the research process really impacted the Blue Record?
For sure. So in the beginning of the Blue Record, or even before I pitched the Blue Record to the social justice program, I went to the archives, digitally speaking. I think I may have went once in person, but I do remember just going in digitally. And I also went to the AUC Blue Library's archive because I really want to sit with the content that's there and begin thinking about what will make this podcast unique. Not saying that podcasting is just a quick, easy thing you can do, but since there's so many podcasts, I want to be intentional about the podcast that would be housed at Spelman. What would it do? How would it function? Who is it functioning for, right? And with that in mind, I went to the archive thinking about people from Spelman and people from Spelman that people don't know about. I know we all know Marian Wright Elderman and Rosa, who's like our sort of Spelman sister. Did I say Rosa? Jesus, I'm talking about the color purple. Alice, excuse me. Sorry, Rosa Parks. But I began thinking about people who we don't really know about, right? The editors of the Spelman Connection, or some of our activists, foot soldiers who were leading the demonstrations during the Rodney King riots on campus in the AUC. So, with that in mind, I wanted to bring their voices to light. And I thought, what they're talking about is parallel to what we're talking about, like things happening on campus or politics of the administration, and just seeing those intersections. I thought we need to be in conversation. And, I didn't know where all these individuals were out in the world or if they will even come back, but I knew that I already had their voices preserved here. So let's incorporate them with our voices and make those connections. So for the first 2 months, September 2019 to October or November 2019, I was in the archive because I really wanted to make sure my pitch was strong and it made sense. And I wanted to show the seriousness of this project, that it would combine the voices of current social justice fellows, and there's a research background too, because what a lot of people may or may not know about the Spelman Social Justice Program, it's a scholars program first and foremost. So we're scholar activists. So making sure we have that research angle established is crucial. And that's what I want to focus on. And that also led me to constructing an archives team. So the archives team for the Blue Record has a head archivist and then 2 to 3 supporting archivists with an archives intern, and they work with the Spelman Archive with Miss Holly to go into the archives and find stories, find people, find our siblings' voices, and especially like finding those voices for a certain conversation angle we're trying to have. I think the best example would be our Valentine's For the Record, and For the Record is our archival mini-series dedicated to the archives. Our typical main episode focus, which I love so much. But for one of our FTR episodes, we brought in an alum who actually created, at the time it was the Lavender Circle, but it's now known as Afrikiti today, our LGBTQIA organization on campus. This is what happens when I put on mascara, my eyelash. Anywho, in that episode, I'm sorry, me. On that episode, we incorporated some of her work from previous years and her words in that moment. So it was pretty cool, like just involving intergenerational conversations through different mediums and modes and putting them in an episode. And that's like the behind the scenes research of the podcast, which, when people ask, where's the episode? When is it coming out? We're in the library, we're in the archives, because we want to be very intentional about each of our episodes and making sure that we're incorporating as many voices as we can to make a rich and sound conversation that will be archived. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. And that is exactly why, like you said, I get nervous about things near my eyes. So I tend not to wear mascara or anything. So thank you for that wonderful illumination. And so, Tiana, going back to your work with community-driven archives focused on freedom fighters, incarcerated populations as well, from your position as a student, a woman of color, a memory worker, how did you decide to commit time and resources to these histories? Her stories, our stories.
Yeah, I think I guess some more background about how I got into this work. I was a McNair scholar when I was at UC Davis. And so I was tasked with creating a research project. And I knew I had passion and interest in looking into the carceral system, but also this passion for storytelling and nonfiction filmmaking in particular, documentaries. So I was kind of thinking like, how can I interlock the two and use this like amazing platform and these resources with McNair, which is an amazing program. I see in the chat, yes, McNair is an amazing program. I was thinking to myself, like, how do I kind of interlock these two and use these resources that I have as a woman of color, as someone who's in humanities, and McNair is often like science driven and STEM driven. So I was like, how can I kind of make the most of this opportunity? And so when I was already thinking about the organizing I was doing, and my mentor, this professor who turned into a mentor, was like, I have this amazing archive that I want you to help me digitize. My first, I guess, point of action was to talk to people and to talk to the elders from the movement. So as I mentioned, I'm really interested in oral history. So I was kind of trying to find many ways, and using social media mostly, to reach out to people who were either formerly incarcerated, who know folks that are currently incarcerated, and thinking of ways that I can engage with them to figure out how to build this archive in the most, I guess, like ethical way. So the first person that I had the privilege of talking to, which propelled me forward, because there were many times where I was going to stop, because it's very, it's a lot of work, it's heavy, it's scary sometimes. But the first person I had the privilege of talking to was Jean Couchet, who is the only surviving Soledad brother. So it was just amazing talking to him. And he had just gotten out of prison in 2018, and I spoke to him in 2019. And he was like, the reason I'm speaking to you is because you are a student. Like, if you were just like a journalist or any other person, like, I wouldn't speak to you, because I'm just reminded of when I was going through my trials as a Soledad brother in the 70s. It was the students who were fighting for us. It was the students who were really like holding us down. So having spoken to him and like building a relationship with him kind of propelled me forward to continue talking to people who are much more, elderly, but were a part of the prison movement, and could kind of guide me to resources present day of folks who are currently, organizing on the ground, like younger folks, which is how I got in touch with Black August Los Angeles. And they have their connections to Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. So I think McNair was like the starting point for me to figure out how I can like use this resource in academia to kind of tie it to the community, and kind of like, I got a lot of grants like as being a part of McNair. So I was like, okay, how do I use like academic language to make sure I can get these funds so that I can drive to like San Quentin and like talk to, so kind of trying to like figure out the best way to do that without much backlash or much people like looking at my project like, maybe this isn't appropriate. So, and I think elders and people talking to people really helped me kind of solidify appropriate ways to do that, and thinking about building the archive and so forth.
Tiana, thank you for that. And I want to go back to that follow-up question about some of the challenges, I would say, of working with incarcerated populations and individuals. I think, like you said, just the sheer nature of incarceration, limiting access, the policing of movement, the brutality of it. So I will, and the importance of that collaboration, though, in seeing individuals incarcerated as collaborators, as equal partners, and just the way you wonderfully illuminated your work, and the individuals who I know who've either taught courses or also done collaborative work were also very intentional. And again, I kind of think about that, the whole radical empathy in the archives framework is bringing that feminist ethics of care, and that idea of, incorporating conversation around structural oppression in the carceral state when you're doing this work. So if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how maybe some of the challenges, how you mitigated them, and a little bit more about your collaborations there working within this carceral system.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is maintaining a position of objectiveness through this all. So that's very difficult, because a lot of folks who are incarcerated have their own kind of agendas that may not be like tied to the agenda of the archive, or they have their own personal lives, and many all like very understood. I kind of understand where a lot of them come from, but I think it's the most difficult part is like me remaining objective and not kind of falling into the, I guess, vision of one individual person because of like the conversation I've had with them and details they may have shared with me. And then on the other hand, I think going inside, like having the experience of going inside via organizations. So I was a part of an organization called the Prison Education Program, which is like a national program. So they have one chapter here at USC. And I mentioned at UC Davis, I went in to help with the podcast, to help as like an assistant teacher with creating this podcast that incarcerated men were pretty much running. And so there's like one element of like making sure that your interpersonal connections with these individuals is like remaining objective and like resourceful and kind of not out of line with what your own goal is, and also keeping in mind what their experiences are. And then also like the bureaucracy of it all with, there's only so many things you can say when you're inside. There's ways that you have to kind of interact where it kind of dehumanizes them in many ways. So I think that was definitely a challenge for me, kind of figuring out like, okay, I'm going inside and there's all these rules and regulations I have to abide by. And in many ways, I feel like I'm perpetuating this system that I feel like I'm against. But it's like, if I don't go inside, then I'm not able to have those connections or be educated about how I as a person who is not incarcerated, you know, as a person outside of this group, like how I can further educate folks and further continue building bridges for the inside and the outside. So it's definitely, I think I'm constantly, once again, going back to just talking to elders and talking to folks who were formerly incarcerated and can kind of give me guidance on like how to build those relationships. And I think like that concept of intergenerational discourse, in that they have seen a lot of the ramifications of this work over many, many decades, and the many ways that media has changed certain ramifications. So I think their advice is just very, I've cherished their advice a lot when I'm speaking to John Couché or former Black Panthers or whoever, who have really seen COINTELPRO and all these different, you know, outside kind of forces breaking apart movements. So I just try and stay connected to them while also staying connected to folks who are currently incarcerated, and kind of trying to build community with them and make sure their voices are heard in a way that's appropriate for the movement that I align myself with and that I feel like I believe in, and what my purpose is with the archive. So staying objective in that as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tiana. And like you said, having family members incarcerated, and hearing particularly those who teach, and also librarians, you know, just the really restrictive nature of prisons, period, the harsh restrictiveness. So thank you. So I will, this is a question for you both, Kayla, and I can start with you, going furthering that conversation around privacy and working within restrictions, but also thinking about them in terms of protecting, you know, individuals, or like you said, talking about difficult conversations, you know, Kaylin, particularly, you know, thinking of your work with the Blue Record podcast team, and maybe working with student activists and organizers currently. So for you, this is for you both in the different communities and positions you work in. What privacy or restriction concerns do you all have and have come across while doing your work? And do you think there are any unique considerations versus working at academic institution, Kayla, or like you were elaborating on, Tiana, working with community focused archives? So Kayla, we can start with you for that question, if you don't mind.
Sure. So currently I'm a 2021 Pulitzer Center Reporting Fellow, and a part of my fellowship, I wanted to cover an ambassador. And the story is done, currently dealing with what I'm going to talk about, the government. So when it comes to restrictions with someone who's no longer a private citizen, I had to learn all this language this summer. It is hard to get their unfiltered truth on a situation. So my ambassador spoke very diplomatically about diversity and inclusion at the State Department, which that's fine. I had a feeling of what I was walking into. But when we had our off the record conversation, that's what I was really hoping to capture, but I can't because it's off the record. Now, if I was unethical, I could. I'm not. Like I said earlier, I had journalistic training as a teenager, and I still use that training as a writer, as a storyteller. And I never want to have my collaborator or interlocutor feeling like I am betraying this trust that we had in this intimate moment of sharing. And it is hard when you have those restrictions when it comes to the government. And I find it kind of interesting that I'm thinking about a capstone that's dealing with the legacy of some of these former ambassadors, and even figuring out like what can they share and what can they not share. Case in point, Ambassador Aurelia Brazil, I believe she served in Ethiopia during the embassy bombing. I don't know how much information she can share with me. I'm not sure. I could ask. I might get a State Department statement, but I think there's a way to be comfortable with those types of statements on the record. And there's a way to ask the question to get the answer that you're hoping gives more of an authentic response rather than a reserved response. But regardless, what I had to learn this summer, and still, is that this person who I'm speaking to is still the same person I'm speaking to. They may give me a response that, I want a little more oomph, a little more, but they're just saying it in a different way for, just for the sake of saying it in a different way. So I think the only thing when it comes to restrictions is that recognize that they're there, but don't betray the trust you've made with that collaborator. The ambassador did not have to take time to speak to me at all. She could have spoken to anyone at the Atlantic, the Post, the Times, but she spoke to me, a recent graduate. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to get vulnerable with me and, even have like our off the record conversation. When I mean she had back-to-back meetings, she made that space for us to have those moments. So I think if you feel like if you're doing like live archiving and keeping and like recording types of conversations, just being mindful of the fact that it takes a lot to share certain truths about certain institutions. And if anyone is aware of the State Department is a bureaucratic, risk-averse entity. And even though that there's going to be a push for diversity and inclusion for the next 5 to 10 years, there's so much to unpack. And for a woman who has experienced some of those challenges that you face on the job, whether it be here in DC or at posts abroad, there's just some things that how you say what you say, it does matter, especially if you're no longer a private citizen. So keeping that in the back of my head, especially since this is the field I'm going into, and a part of the field I'm going into is what I also want to capture. It is it's concerning at the same time, but it's interesting how these women who I've spoken to, they still make space to share their true authenticity. And that's what I aim to capture. Even if there are some restrictions, I love how we're all willing to work around them to get the truth out.
Yeah, I think going off of Kayla's point, specifically talking about like not wanting to betray trust, I think is a really big area of concern for me when thinking about privacy in particular, because I personally like to take a very collaborative approach with, especially with the distribution of whatever the work is, whether it's a short documentary I've worked on or whether it's the archive. So right now I have an element of Black August archives that I'm working on, which is putting out these oral history interviews that I've been working on. And throughout these interviews, I recognize that folks get very comfortable and start saying things that maybe they, after they're like, oh, wherever you put that, could you edit that part out? Like, I don't really want people to hear that. And for me, I know some people will be like, oh, well, it's really crucial to the story, or it's really crucial to to kind of the point of this entire project. But for me, I really want to make sure that the editing is collaborative, because I just feel like it's not my story at the end of the day. And if I'm assisting someone else with sharing their voice, I really make sure that they're a part of that editing process. So like whatever, so the format like I'm thinking of for Black August Archives and the oral histories is, rather than having like the entire interviews available for people, kind of just put out clips that the individuals who I spoke to are comfortable with. And for folks like myself who may be doing research and want to like have access to the full interview, we can kind of do like a vetting process with the interviewee and see how comfortable they are with this person having access to the entire, you know, oral history interview. So not like keeping it from people, but making sure that whatever is out, like those snippets on the website, the interviewee is comfortable with. And then if someone wants to go forth and, you know, dive a bit deeper, I also want to make sure that the interviewee is comfortable with that being put out there. So I definitely think in terms of privacy in particular, like not kind of disrespecting anyone's privacy and doing that, I like to take a very, very collaborative approach and work very closely with whoever it is that I'm, you know, kind of taking their story, getting their story and capturing it for folks.
Yes, thank you so much. And you both are, you know, really bringing up such important points about, like you said, the collaborative nature, but also the respect of the individual and the organization. And then again, we can put a pin and circle back to some of the, you know, constraints that you do have when you're doing things in relation to an institution such as the State Department, or even, Tiana, in your case, you know, still being affiliated with the institution versus your own, you know, principles and moral and ethical values, I should say. So we can put a pin into that. I'll go to our next question here, following that up. So yesterday we had a conversation with myself and some other colleagues of mine, HBCU archivists, and we talked about, like you all talked about, really the challenges of making contemporary stories available. So, you know, wanting to make sure to include, you know, again, thinking about state-sanctioned violence, again, the challenges that people are facing in the pandemic, you know, wanting to have conversations, particularly around the protests against state-sanctioned violence, but also thinking about people having the opportunity to step away, but also mitigating risk and harm to people participating in protests and organizing by maybe not sharing things with personal information, faces. These are some of the things that we really hit on yesterday. So I wanted to ask both of your opinion in terms of how long should we wait for the stories that are of organizing that are taking place, particularly in Black communities now? And does privacy and surveillance play a role in your views on this, or any of the work that you've done? And I'm happy to repeat as needed. And thank you so much, Catherine. I think Lael or Andre came up with this wonderful question.
May we get a repeat of the
Absolutely,
question?
I know that was a lot. So in you all's opinion, how long should we wait to share those stories or resources of organizing that are currently taking place, particularly in Black communities? You know, so I think maybe another way too to get at that, do you think there should be any type of time frame, or what are your thoughts maybe rather on what are any time frames or restrictions on allowing people to access these materials, either because of privacy or perspective? Perhaps that's a good way to put it. Does that make sense? Okay. And I know, feel free to sit with that for a second. If you know it's a big question. I think one of our colleagues yesterday, Dr. Lopez Matthews, again, you know, was really kind of talking about mitigating access, again, not to be a gatekeeper, but allowing people to have perspective sometimes with regards to processing things that are more current but also the idea of, like you all were mentioning, Tiana, I think you did a great example of when you're sharing things, in an interview now, maybe you don't want that shared a week later, but maybe you have thoughts about it 30 years later, thinking about people whose problematic, behavior and retweets surface years later. Some people hold themselves accountable. Some people double down on their foolishness. So just, any thoughts that you all have introductory, even about should there be a period, of waiting before making resources or stories or interviews, things like that available?
I think that's a really good question that I'm like, this is my first time thinking about it, honestly, of like, there's a lot of stories out there that I think, and there's a lot of storytellers out there also, of just a lot of individuals are getting into this realm of storytelling because it's so multifaceted. And I think often you can just see like a interesting story. You can see a story that just needs to be told, and you reach out immediately and want to talk to that individual, and maybe the circumstance that you're trying to capture just happened, and that's why you think it's even more important, is that it just happened and it's related to today. People need to hear about this. But I think now hearing this question is kind of having me like check myself in a way, and thinking like, is that even ethical, like to not allow folks to process? Like if for instance, if someone was at a protest and they were arrested, and it's like common knowledge on social media because there's images of them that they were arrested, and then as a storyteller you're reaching out like, hey, like folks need to know like how to protect themselves, like that's your intent behind wanting to interview them. Like, yes, that is a intention that is sound and ethical in many ways, but then it's also like, what harm can be done to this individual who already is facing perhaps time or facing consequences with the state, the county, like whatever it is. And so I guess my answer, because like I said, I haven't thought about this before, but I definitely think I will going forward, is that it depends on the circumstance. And once again, like going back to it all being collaborative, just listening to that individual, if they want to revoke their story, if they want to take parts of it out, just really weighing like the weight of like danger versus the weight of the value, and like where does that fall, which is very complicated often, and it's very difficult to kind of know if you're like in the right or in the wrong. But I think making decisions by yourself is kind of gives you more room to make mistake. That's what I found. So I really like making sure that I'm talking to people and being collaborative. But with that, like in terms of the time frame, I think it's really difficult to say, and it kind of just depends on the situation and also the intent behind it.
Absolutely. Amen to all those insights. Thank you, Tia. I know it's a layered question. And Kayla, if you'd like to share some thoughts.
Sure. I echo everything Tiana said, because this is something I never thought about. And it's actually going to inform how I proceed with my graduate capstone, even though that there has been time since the women I'm looking at have served in the US government. There are still some things that I'm sure they're still digesting, right? Regardless of their season, regardless if they switch careers or not, there are still things, it's still sensitive material, regardless of how much time has passed. But I like what Tiana was saying about, as a storyteller, you have to think about how you can end up making a mistake by trying to meet a deadline. I think if it was a story that I felt really passionate about, I would share that passion, but I wouldn't push for the story to get out because of my driven passion. It's not my story. It's just a story that I could help facilitate going to another platform to be recognized from a wider audience, but it's not my story. And I know I wouldn't want someone to rush me into sharing a story. I wouldn't want to put anyone else in that situation either. But I think what would be fascinating to see, since a lot of people in Generation Z are documenting what is going on right now from the protest of last year, I'm curious to see if our generation will begin making our own archives as a way of storytelling what is going on. And I've already seen it happen where people are keeping photos and they're beginning to write in journals. Some people take to Twitter to write their 140 character threads. But I'm seeing the little ways in which people are making space to have their digital archive. And in a sense, I'm not saying it cuts out the middleman of the storyteller, but in a sense, it allows that person control of their own narrative. And I think that's pretty fascinating. And it's going to be interesting to see the relationship between storytellers and interlocutors moving forward, now that we do have mediums that people can just put their story and their truth out to inform the public about what they're doing or what they're dealing with. But I would say that if anyone's listening and they have an archive, keep an archive. If that's journaling, taking photos. For my graduate years, I'm keeping a journal. It's juicy right now. Tea, because and it's okay. I can't wait for my journals when I live abroad. I know that's gonna be juicier. And my goal is to have this archive so that when I'm in my 50s and 60s and I want to write a book for whatever reason, I'm just gonna look back, take photos, have like photos of my actual written handwriting in my book, or a way to like pass on to someone else, children, mentees, as a way of saying, this was me in the year of 2021, going through emotion in this life simulation, trying to figure out what's next and what's not. So my hope is that what we're all learning in this pandemic world is the importance of memory and the importance of like making space for your memory, and knowing that it's an awesome opportunity to work with a storyteller to get your truth and your memories out there, but it's also awesome to keep your own. Like my grandmother, she recently passed, and my mom and my dad went down to her home to, begin packing up belongings, and they found so many things of hers. And my parents like to say she was an organized hoarder, which I take offense because I'm turning into one. But what I found interesting, she had journals from college, and this was like in the 60s. Like, she talked about how she met my grandfather. She has like little like, what are they called? Like handkerchiefs, like, the hand like made handkerchiefs of cotton, like cotton handkerchiefs, like authentic stuff. It's pretty cool. And unfortunately, I'm not back in Atlanta to go through all of her belongings, or back in Mobile where she was, to go through everything, but just knowing that she left an archive of her. And I learned so much about her that way, like learning that she created or helped found one of the first libraries in LaGrange, Georgia. I didn't know that. Or what her master's thesis was on. I didn't know that. You see what I'm saying? So my hope is that with Gen Z, as much as we love posting and tweeting, I also hope we are committed to preserving our own stories, if not for other people to see in the future, but just for our own reflection.
Yes, all the snaps to both of you, really. And I promise we weren't, really trying to stump you or anything, but I think you both show the power of what does it mean for us to be self-reflective when we are doing this memory work. Like you said, these are, and I think that shows that both of you, are ethical, inclusive memory work to really think about the impacts that we can have on our collaborations, and to think about things broadly and like, well, as you said, Tiana, I have this intent, but let me be in community and have the conversation. So that's, like you said, really important. Like you said, we don't do things in isolation. And Kayla, you must have read my mind for our last question before the Q&A, really, about, like you were saying, in terms, I think you really got at that, the importance of keeping, an archive, and how it's wonderful to document yourself, on social media, but the very last question talks about, really what you both described, like 140 characters in a tweet, really, there's limitations there. So you both really elaborated on how it's important. And as Zoe Bambara was saying earlier, one of our, wonderful student activists, and it's also important to keep something for yourself. And I really like the ways that she said that. So since you both, kind of really touched on the importance of, as well as the limitations of social media, I wanted to ask we have 5 minutes left before our break, but we'll come back for a fuller Q&A, which I'm elated. I just wanted to end this part by asking, maybe because of the nature of the work that you all do, what are some of the ways that you have found care for yourself in doing this work? I think self-care gets kind of whittled down to, oh, manicures and pedicures, nothing wrong with that. But what are some of the ways that you take care of yourself, and maybe through that document yourself? And Kayla, you already gave a wonderful description. The journals that you'll donate to Spelman eventually. But if you all want to elaborate on some of the ways that you continue to document yourself, but also care for yourself in doing work that can at times be heavy.
I had the privilege recently of going to a Black Lives Matter LA meeting in person, which was nerve-wracking, but also like exciting, and just like so many feelings upon arrival. But when I got there, I was hearing that they were going to have healers there, like before the meeting, and then food, and then like the meeting, and get into discussion like defunding the police and like all these different heavy concepts. But I was like, what is this like healer like concept that they're going to have? And when I arrived, they had like Reiki healers, so like massage therapy, and I was like, this is just like, I've never been in a community or like organizing space like this before, where they're like, we have food for you to also take home if you're struggling and don't want to say that you're struggling, or maybe you got denied for food stamps and don't want to say that as a student. And it's like so many things, and like we see you and we recognize that you need to take care of yourself. And we also have like these healers here who can kind of give you a moment to go inward. And so that really inspired me personally since that meeting to start meditating, which was a practice I hadn't really dived into prior. And I think also having, interest in the archives and knowing that there's a lot of ancestral knowledge that has not been documented, that we don't have access to today, like just seeing visually like that other Black people saying like, no, we have healers here, and it's not just like this these only like these concepts of just Christianity and the Black church that we're always used to, like just go pray, and like therapies and the thing that you go to, like just go pray. Like just seeing that was like, wow, really kind of like mind blowing to me, and like really changed my life. And it's only been like 3 weeks, but I've started like meditating just from seeing that and recognizing like, okay, if these folks that I'm organizing with are valuing my self-care, like why am I not also doing that? But in terms of the documentation question, like along with that, I've kind of been looking at social media differently lately. I had recently put my Instagram on private. I don't have Twitter because Twitter's kind of a lot for me. So that's kind of me practicing self-care, because Twitter, I don't want to be arguing with people. So I just don't do Twitter. Like I know myself, I just stay off of Twitter. But yes, I think definitely meditating and like keeping things more private, like Zoe was kind of mentioning earlier, is ways that I've been kind of diving into self-care, which is very new to me in this work, kind of grappling between self-care and doing work that often puts yourself very out there. So
To add really quickly, my grandmother always told me, nobody knows your business unless you tell them. And let me just say, I've been hiding my story on Instagram from certain individuals, and it just feels great because I really don't want to interact with you. Unfortunately, you already followed me. I don't want to be petty and like remove follower, but I'm getting close. But I believe in just having a separation. Now that I've started graduate school, I don't know about you, Tiana, but I'm tired. I don't know how other people went through this, but I'm exhausted. Like I don't know how I'm gonna make it throughout the semester because I'm tired now. And this is just week 3. Woo. But yeah, I limit my interactions on social media. I only logged back in yesterday to drop the photo about Project Stand and the event. And then I'm gonna log back off until after midterms. Might log back in, maybe not, but just carving out space to detach, even like from AUC Twitter, AUC social media, because you have to have that like moment with yourself and ask yourself, have you really graduated from this? And I think a lot of us have graduated from certain spaces, certain people, certain things. And if it's not helping you grow to be your holistic, healthy self, cut it. And that's what I've been practicing. And I've been happier. Skin's been glowing, lost some weight. Now I've only been in DC for like 6 weeks and I feel lighter. Even though I have a lot of work on my plate, I feel lighter like every day. And practicing that, journaling, drinking water, and just, carving out moments to just be, that's how I've been taking care of myself, but also still making time to document this life simulation we're all in, right? So yeah.
That's all Mary had a little lamb. That seriously, that thank you both so much, because I think that is, and everybody, there's a lot of amens in the chat about yes, block, mute for self-care, because we do have to think about being self-aware, like you said, and making sure we can be at our best for ourselves first before we can really be present. And I think especially we're talking about the issues that we've explored today, and the both of you, these incredible academic pursuits as well, but doing this memory work in community and again around heavy topics, it's really important. And then I think back to the point you both made, and Tiana, like you were saying, like if we're not taking this step back, thinking about something my sister of the Stacks, Shatra Powell, said about being slow and intentional archives. I think, again, we think about this rush to, certainly I think of my colleagues here in different institutions, this rush to process, this rush to do this, rush to get it out there, get the finding aid up. But sometimes you're not being intentional about, well, how is this described? How is this impacting this community? What are our true intentions? So with that being said, an incredible thank you to you both. I think we have tipped into our break time just a skosh.